Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Crazy Lightbulb, and welcome back to more D&D Talk. We're going to be talking about the combat, and how does combat work? Well, when combat works, you have three things that you have to worry about at the first start. One, if it's a surprise round or not. If it's a surprise round, basically your whole group's stealthing, and they get the drop on the enemy, which means usually... which is actually right here. If I can highlight that and see if that goes ahead. So basically the DM determines who might be surprised and who's not. Depending on who's surprised, determines what players can act and how well and if they can act first or not. This could work both ways, such as enemies could have the drop on the players, or the players could have the drop on the enemies. So it kind of goes step by step. So the combat steps are determining surprise. If no one's surprised, and this is kind of just a general thing, then what we do is we establish positions. Basically, who's where do we see people. Now this is a lot harder. If you're not using like a D&D map with miniatures and stuff like that, it makes it really hard to establish positions. You have to have a really good imagination to establish positions and kind of have a general idea what you are. If you're doing it without a battle map or anything, I highly recommend that you, as the dungeon master, you're a little bit more lenient, but as a player, you have to be extremely understanding of the dungeon master's choices when he does tell you, oh, well, you're a little too far back. So after surprising and establishing positions go, then you roll for initiative. Initiative works so easily. What it does is you just roll a d20 and you add your dex modifier. Now, that determines on who goes first. Now, there's other things where you can boost your initiative, such as alert or even the bardic jack of all trades, to boost your initiative. Going first could be a really good thing, or going last and being patient could be a good thing as well. It all really depends on what you want to do. Now, on your turn, you have three things that you could do. Now, when it comes to a combat order, every person, let's say if there's a group of 5 people, every person has 6 seconds in-game to act what they want to do. Now, I'm not saying that you have to be like, oh my gosh, it's going to take 6 seconds for me to make a decision and do all this. No. In game time, when you're role-playing, everything happens within 6 seconds of the game world. So, if you're going to punch somebody in the face, that's going to be within 6 seconds. So you have to really think about that. So let's say if your players want to be like, oh, well, I want to jump on here and then climb up and then do this. It's like, whoa. You got to remember, this is all within 6 seconds of you doing this. Now, when a round, if there is a spell that lasts for 10 rounds or for a minute, that's basically 60 seconds. That's 1 minute, that's a round. That's 10 rounds. So you kind of get the gist of it. So anyways, moving on. So there's 3 things that you could do. You have a move action, you have a bonus action, and you have a standard action. Now, as a bonus action, you can use, like, if you're a rogue, you can use the cunning action feature, which will allow you to do certain things. There's also spells that are bonus spells. But when you cast a bonus spell, you are only allowed to cast a cantrip after that, unless stated otherwise. So that's kind of how that works. Also, as a bonus action, sometimes your dungeon master, depending on what the dungeon master lets you do, let you use your bonus action to do specific small things, such as, well, it could be certain things, such as, let's see, making a perception check to see what's around you, to look around. Also, to really move around and to do your own things, or, well, not really move, unless you're a rogue. Rogues can move as a bonus action, unless you are a different race that has a different kind of moving action. But bonus actions are basically little tiny things that you can do in between when you're doing an attack or when you're doing that, or sometimes you can use a bonus action to attack. So if you're using 2 weapons, or if you're a monk, you can actually do 2 attacks and use one as a bonus action. But that's 2-weapon fighting, so that's we kind of got into that a little later, a little bit earlier in my other episodes, but we're going to keep going down the line. So a standard action basically is an action for you to do anything, whether it's attack, whether it's to heal, whether it's to drink a potion, whether it's to do a lot of things. When you do pull out your weapon and attack, usually it's like a quick draw feature. You can instantly pull out a weapon and fire, or instantly pull out a weapon and hit someone with it. Now, unless you have a certain feat, if you're doing 2 weapons, it's going to take, sometimes it'll take a little bit, it'll take I would say for me, it would take a bonus action for you to do that. Other players, other DMs might say, you know what, it's gonna require you next turn to draw it out and do that again. It all depends on the dungeon master. But actions you can use to cast spells, you can use to do basically whatever you want. Climb, jump, it can be a number of things, depending on what you want to do. Sometimes the DM or the dungeon master will actually kind of adjust these rules. So that's what you mostly do, is move, bonus, and action. Now, to talk about your movement position can be broken up into different parts. So if your movement speed is 30 feet, you can technically move 10 feet, do something, and then move another 20 feet. So that's kind of that situation there. You can use there's different types of speeds. If you're flying, usually you're a little bit faster. If you're walking, usually you're at your normal speed. And if you're swimming, sometimes that takes half your speed. And it's usually what is called difficult terrain. Difficult terrain usually requires half your movement to move. If you want to move your full speed through difficult terrain, it takes you an extra 5 feet of movement to move through that extra piece of terrain. As it says on here, difficult terrain costs 1 extra foot. So if you're moving through a 5-foot square of difficult terrain, it's going to cost you 10 feet of movement to get through that square. So difficult terrain, good, bad, like stairs, rubble, vines, whatever you think could be called difficult terrain. Being prone. If you fall down on your back and you're prone, to standing up takes more effort to do so. How does that work? Standing up takes half of your movement. So if you fall prone on the floor, and for order you to stand back up, it takes half your movement. So you're gonna be at 15 feet of movement rather than 30. The only thing is, when you're moving through creature squares, you can move through friendly squares. You're allowed to do that. You're allowed to move through creature spaces that are 2 times the size of your creature. Or if you're a small creature, usually you can move through any spot, no problem. I believe if you're a halfling, you'll be able to move through any kind of size creature square. But sometimes they do cause difficult terrain. And also, flying is a totally different thing. Basically, flying, flying is basically kind of just flying. It's really nothing more to it. It's easy to do. You just fly into the air, and you do. But basically, difficult terrain in the air, such as if you're going through some very thick, windy storm, it's the exact same thing. It's hazardous terrain. Difficult terrain, it's going to be harder for you to move through it. Everything's a little different. Now, based on creature sizes, they all determine what spaces that they choose. A tiny creature takes up a very tiny space of a square. A regular creature, such as a small or medium, can go 5-foot squares. Large creatures are 10-foot by 10-foot squares. Huge creatures are 15 by 15, and then the gargantuan creatures are 20 foot by 20 foot squares, which are incredibly huge. Now, typically when you're moving through, you want to watch out. Basically, when you're moving through creatures, you want to make sure that it's okay with the DM for you to do so. You have to make sure that the DM communicates with you on doing so. Anyways, also, you have to determine when you're making spells or when you're making attacks, you have to determine ranges. Range on spells and corners causes cover and all this other different types of stuff. So when you're firing a spell or shooting, you have to be careful. Because if you go against somebody that has a cover in a corner, it could give them +5 to their armor class. If you're shooting a spell, it could also give them a +5 to armor class. Or if you're, well, I guess that's kind of different if you use something that makes you roll like a saving throw. But when you're making a ranged attack, watch out for cover. Now, your attacks actions in combat. You're allowed to attack, which means you're allowed to do a regular attack, shooting attack, spell attack, any one of those. You can do a dash. Dash action allows you to actually move your extra feet of movement as your speed. So if you use a dash action, basically you're doing your movement, so that's 30 feet, and then as a dash action, you move another 30 feet. Now rogues can do this as a bonus action, which is really, really cool. But that's a different story. Disengage. Now, when you disengage from someone, you can use that as an action to not provoke an opportunity attack when you move away from that creature. Now, let me explain what opportunity attacks are. Opportunity attacks are when if you move out of a creature's range of reach, that creature gets a free attack on you. Which means you could get clobbered in the head, you can get kicked in the knee, or you can basically, if the creature is powerful enough, it could even, if you have the Warcaster feat, you can even cast a spell. Certain feats allow you to do certain things. But that's basically, disengage allows you not to provoke opportunity. Dodge. Dodge allows you to be able to dodge any ranged attacks and have advantage on dexterity saving throws against certain attacks. So if the creature tries to hit you, it is at disadvantage. And you have advantage on dexterity saving throws. So let's say if a creature casts Fireball on you, your dodge action gives you advantage. If a creature tries to attack you with a melee weapon, that creature has disadvantage. To help. Help and assist is the same thing. When you help a creature or when you help somebody, usually that gives a creature advantage on a certain roll. Maybe not necessarily an attack, but it could be. You never know. I really don't think you can really aid someone to attack another creature. I mean, that's instant. That's kind of different. I've never really tried that, but I really don't like that kind of rule. Helping, I believe, is like when you're helping somebody climb up somewhere, or when you're helping somebody open up a door, or lifting something. That's what I call helping. Or assisting on a knowledge check, or something like that. Basically, you guys are working together to do something. Attacking, I don't know if you can assist someone on attacking, but that's kind of a different thing. I guess it all depends on Dungeon Master's discretion. Hide. Hide is another awesome action that you can do. Basically, it causes you to roll a stealth check, and you have to hide behind something. Now, a lot of players kind of use and abuse this because you cannot hide behind someone unless you're a halfling or a small creature, and you can get away with it. Use hide as you normally would in real life. Okay, there's a bush. I'm going to go hide in there. Well, here's the thing. If the creature that you're hiding from already saw you go into the bush, but now they can't see you anymore, they still know you're in the bush. You're not out of their awareness range. You're not dropping the beat on them. So, that's one thing. But anyways, now, a ready action. A ready action allows you to activate as a trigger. So what you do is you hold your action, not your movement, not your bonus. If you ready your action, you automatically lose unless you do your movement and your bonus first, and then you ready your action. The only thing you can hold is your action. So basically what you're doing is when you're ready in your action, you're holding for a trigger point. So let's say I'm holding my action. What for? Well, I'm going to be casting a spell if somebody goes through that door. Okay, so you're waiting for somebody to go through that door, then you're going to fire a spell at them. Or, I'm going to ready my action. What are you going to do? Well, I can't see right now, so I'm going to wait for my mage friend to cast light, and then as soon as I see, I'm going to attack. Okay. Now, if you ready your action and that trigger never happens, you can break that trigger and automatically activate your action. And you can do your action as normal. But if the trigger happens, then you have to activate that trigger. So, anyways, so when you're using an object, in order for you to use an object, you have to pull it out and you have to use the object. Usually, as I would say, that would be a quick draw. So you automatically get to do that. You're only allowed to pull one item out at a time per round, unless you have a dual wielding feat or something else. So to use an object, you pull out an object and you activate it as an action. To interact with something or to use something, it is an action. To whip it out of your bag or to whip it out of your side pouch, it is not a bonus, but it is usually a free action. Unless you're actually searching through your backpack, then you have to actually search through and find it, and that's going to take an action. But if it's like equipped to your belt, like a sword, or your staff, or something like that, or something that's on your back, like a bow, usually you can just whip that object out and then use it. Kind of like a quick draw feature. So, how do you make an attack? Well, attacks are pretty simple. You choose a target, you determine what modifiers you used when you roll for an attack, and then you resolve the attack, and then after the attack you roll for damage. So, depending on what you're doing, such as spell attacks or regular strength attacks or even shooting attacks that uses dex, you add your proficiency modifier to your ability modifier, and then that's where you roll for the attack. Very simple, not too hard. Unseen attackers and targets. So if you're going against something invisible, you have disadvantage. And if you don't know where that creature is, you're basically shooting in the dark until you have a general idea of where you're shooting. Now, range attacks use dex, unless you're using a spell or a throwing weapon. Throwing weapon, you can use your strength. A crossbow and a bow, you can use your dexterity. Now, melee attacks. Melee attacks are strength-based, unless they're finesse weapons, which gives them the ability to use dexterity. No unarmed attacks are not considered finesse. We already know that. That's how it is. Unarmed attacks, if you're a monk, cannot be dexterous to the point where they have finesse. So you don't get to have sneak attack with your unarmed attacks ever. Anyways, opportunity attacks are basically when you move out of when somebody moves out of your range or you move out of their range of attack, they get to make a free attack on you as a reaction. Now, reactions are everybody gets one reaction a turn. So if somebody is casting a spell and you cast counter spell to stop it, that's a reaction. Now, if somebody moves out of your range of attack when you're in melee with them, you get to attack them if you would like, and that's a reaction. You get one reaction per turn. Once when the new round starts, you get another reaction. Now, two-weapon fighting. Two-weapon fighting allows you to use two weapons, one on each hand. They must be light weapons, unless you have a feat. So, at that point, if you have a feat, if you have the two-weapon feat, you can actually use two martial weapons. Otherwise, they usually have to be light weapons. Now, grappling. Grappling's a little different. Grappling causes you to do a strength check against their dexterity, acrobatics. Well, not a strength check, an athletics check against their acrobatics or their athletics, depending on which one is higher for them. And they can either slip through or they get grappled. And then they have the grappling rule on them. Cover. Man, there's a lot to cover in this. Woo! So, cover, you have half cover, which gives you +2 to your AC, 3/4 cover, which is +5 to their AC and dexterity saving throws, Or you get total cover, which means they can't be targeted by anything unless a spell or something says otherwise. Now, when you're doing a shoving a creature, it's basically the same thing as doing a grapple, but it's just you're pushing the creature. You can't really push a creature that's larger one size. If it's more than one size larger than you, you can't push or grapple at that. Well, yeah, you really can't, because how can you grapple a giant? Basically, I'm grappling a giant. Oh no, you're holding onto his leg. It's like a little dog. That's not going to impede its movement or anything. Anyways, so damaging and healing. When you roll for hit points, there are certain spells that does healing, and there's certain spells that does damage roll. Usually what it does is it requires your modifier and whatever the spell or whatever the weapon dice tells you to do. So if you're hitting with a longsword, you roll a d8 plus your strength. Or if you're doing it two-handed, you do 1d10 plus your strength. If you're rolling for hit points, such as cure wounds, you usually do 1d8 plus your wisdom modifier. Such as that. Now, once when your hit points go down to 0, you're actually unconscious. At that point, you pretty much have to make dexterity saving throws, which we'll go over in a little bit. Critical strikes. There are many ways to do critical strikes. When you roll a natural 20, the creature automatically, you get to roll the dice twice and add them together, or what other people do is you double the dice that you roll. I like rolling twice the dice because I think it's more fun that way, but a lot of people like to double the dice just to kind of speed things along. It does not include your modifier whatsoever, so any bonus damage besides the dice is not doubled, or it does not get extra dice. Now, there's tons of damage type. As you can see here, there's acid, bludgeoning, cold, fire, force, lightning, necrotic, piercing, poison, psychic, radiant, slashing, and thunder. Whew, that was a lot. There are such things as damage resistance and damage vulnerability. If they're resistance, they take half damage. If they're vulnerable, they take double the damage. Healing. Healing is done out of different contexts. You can use a potion of healing. You can also use cure wounds, but most of the time it takes an action to do so, unless you're using a healing word, which is a bonus action. Look at your spells and look at what you can do. Now, the way you insta-kill somebody is you have to double their maximum hit points to kill them. So let's say you're 30 hit points and a dragon blows fire at you and does 60 points of damage. You're dead because it's past your maximum amount of hit points. Now, if you're 30 hit points and you take 34 hit points, you're not dead. Basically what happens is you fall unconscious, and that means you have to roll dexterity saving throws. In order for you to make a dexterity saving throw, basically you roll a d10, you roll a d20, and roll a 10 or higher, and that succeed. If you roll lower than a d10, or you roll lower than a 10, that's a fail. Rolling a 1 counts as 2 failures. Rolling a 20 allows you to automatically get back up, not stand back up, but automatically regain consciousness and have 1 hit point. If you take damage while being unconscious, you automatically fail 2 saving throws. Because basically when somebody hits you while you're unconscious, it's a critical hit. And a critical hit causes 2 dexterity saving throws. Anyways, stabilizing the creature. Now, if you're stabilizing someone, basically you can use either you can use a spell, you can use the healer's kit. It all depends on what you're doing, and you have to make a certain DC of wisdom modifier or medicine check to be able to go from there. Now, monsters and death. When you're a DM, there's so much to talk about this episode. I swear. Woohoo! Monsters and death. Usually when a dungeon master, when you kill something, it instantly drops to 0 hit points and dies. Unless that creature is a main part of a villain. So the DM might leave him unconscious for the opponents or the players to start questioning or doing something. Now, you can also choose to knock out a creature. So when you make an attack, you can actually say, hey, I'm not going to make this lethal damage. I'm going to make this unlethal. So basically that means is you're just going to be able to knock the creature unconscious. Alright. Temporary hit points. Temporary hit points are completely separate than regular hit points. Temporary hit points are something that will go away first before your original hit points. So let's say a cleric gave you 5 temporary hit points, and then a creature hit you in dealing 10 points of damage. So if you had 5 temporary hit points, those 5 hit points would go away, and then it would take 5 hit points out of your regular maximum hit points. Alright, mounted combat, there's really not a lot of mounted combat. Now there's more classes for it, but usually mounted combat you have a little bit more of advantage. It's very hard for you to lose speed. And also you do, I don't know, I really haven't done mounted combat really, so I can't really say that. But usually you would have to make a dexterity saving check if you fall off the mount or if you fall off the horse if you get hit. So basically, it's kind of like a constitution check for casting a spell. Every time you get hit, every time something happens to your horse or something like that, you have to roll a dexterity saving check to stay on the horse and remain in control. Controlling a mount usually requires animal handling checks. If you have an animal handling check, you're pretty much fine. You just make it and have a certain DC depending on the dungeon master's roll. Now, underwater combat, everything is at disadvantage. Ranged combat, everything is a disadvantage, and all ranged are cut in half. Underwater combat sucks. So, that's basically that. And that's pretty much all of combat. Combat is really simple, it's really easy, and it's interesting in its own way. Thank you guys so much for joining me. This is Combat for Dungeons & Dragons. If you have any more questions or need any more elaborations on something, just remember, you have a movement, you have an action, and you have a bonus action. And when you hold your action, you only hold your action, not your bonus and your movement. And you have 1 reaction per round that you're allowed to use for opportunity attacks or something else that you can do. Now, my recommendation, if you're a starting player, if you're doing an attack, make sure you use every attack you have and use everything at your disposal. Don't hold yourself back. Go all out. Anyways, guys, this is Crazy Lightbulb talking about combat of D&D. Thank you guys so much. Have a wonderful day.